they had pretty bad SIBO, and they really couldn't tolerate FODMAPs, but they got really geeked out on the microbiome, and their stool test was the diversity was pretty poor. So what they actually did to bypass the small intestine was they were doing rectal infusions of fibers.
Wow!
Right?
Oh my goodness!
So they would, again, like most people aren't going to do this, but they basically occasionally give themselves an enema of a mix of some of these resistant starches and fibers as a retention enema. So before they went to bed, they would put in a small amount and then make sure they held it overnight. And they were finding some benefit from doing that. We know that a lot of the polyphenolics as well, and that's just a really fancy way of saying like the spices and things that are in a lot of the different vegetables, seem to independently of the fiber intake be beneficial for a bacteria. For example, like chocolate, everyone's favorite, or at least cocoa powder, right, have shown to be beneficial in boosting the levels of bifidobacterium. And certainly there's a little bit of fiber in cocoa, but it seems to be more about the other phytochemicals that are there. And so one of the questions is, okay, if someone can't tolerate FODMAPs, and this is open, I don't know the answer to this, I've been experimenting with having people use like, berry powders. So whether it's like hawthorn berry powder or just experimenting with some of the different berry powders, blueberries, some of these different powders from fruits and spices, can they tolerate those better? And just a little bit, some people do seem to be able to tolerate those better. And is that kind of a little bit of a hack that we can use to try and get around FODMAP intolerances and encourage some of the beneficial bacteria?
Everyone, it's Mike Mutzel here with HighIntensityHealth.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're live with Dr. Tim Gerstmar, and he's the author of a great ebook that I want to let you know about called The Autoimmune Answer. And we're going to talk about his journey with helping individuals with overcome autoimmune disease. And he has a busy, thriving practice. He's a naturopathic medical doctor from Bastyr University, and he practices here in Redmond, Washington. So, Dr. Tim, how are you doing today?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Just to let you know, I've been a longtime listener of the show, and I'm honored to be on with all of your other great guests. They've taught me a lot too. So hoping I can contribute some and help share a different view of autoimmunity and some more knowledge out there for people.
Love it. Well, thanks for that feedback. I really appreciate that. And thanks again for coming on the show. And let's talk about your unique approach, what you call the new model of autoimmunity. Let's pretend our listeners don't know anything about autoimmunity. How is the new model different from the conventional model?
Well, what I found is a lot of people who come in with autoimmunity really have a doom and gloom mentality about it that's really been perpetuated by, society at large, and especially by their interactions with their medical doctors. So conventionally, the view is, oh, well, you're kind of screwed. You got autoimmunity. I'm sorry that happened. And you know what? Here's some drugs, and let's hope they work well. And, we'll keep our fingers crossed. There's nothing you can do. It's a common story. Like people will say, well, does my diet affect this in any way? And, it'll be like, no, diet has absolutely nothing to do with this. Should maybe, could some supplements help me or anything? No, they're all a waste of time and money. The only thing that can help you is, this particular drug or this cocktail of drugs. People, it's a really defeatist attitude. I mean, the answer is, you have some genetics that predispose you towards autoimmunity. For the most part, some unknown thing has come into your life and triggered off that autoimmunity, and now it's running. And the only thing we can do about it is give you some immunosuppressing drugs to, knock down your immune system and protect your body and prevent you from having huge problems. Mm-hmm. And there's some truth to that, right? But the new view here that I'm laying out and trying to put out there for people is there's a lot more going on.
Right. And there's many modifiable factors. And you talk about heavy metals, you talk about gut bacteria, and obviously the diet. So maybe let's kind of tackle those and maybe in the order that you view them as a clinician as being most important to address first. Like, where do you see the biggest shifts in maybe symptoms and also biomarkers related to the inflammatory response?
Right. So, the thing I lay out is it's not only about genetics. Like genetics are there and they're important, right? They're if you will, kind of the encyclopedia of you is all contained in your genetics. Every bit and piece of you that there is it there in the genetics. But what the Genome Project showed us a number of years ago is that it's just way more complicated than just genetics. And there's this field now, I think a lot of people have heard about, called epigenetics, or how our genes are changed or modified. So again, if you have the encyclopedia of you, your epigenome is paper clips and little highlighters that tell the cell, read this piece. This piece has been marked out and said, this is important. Like someone went through and highlighted it. And so when you're flipping through the encyclopedia, you land on this part that's been emphasized. And then also epigenetics closes off sections of the genome as well. So it's like putting paper clips on certain pages and just saying those are unavailable, don't read those. Right. And one of the problems, this is a subject we're not going into with cancer, of course, is that all of those markers get scrambled. And now suddenly, this liver cell that used to be a liver cell, de-differentiates and stops being a liver cell and starts becoming, something else. And so, in some cases there are genetic changes there, but in a lot of cases we're finding, there's epigenetic changes. And so short of, the miracle therapies that are supposedly coming in the next years where we can literally change our genetics, right? Put in new pages into that encyclopedia or rip out old pages. What we're left with is that we can change our epigenetics and we can change the way that our genome is expressing itself. So if you have autoimmunity, you certainly got some genes that make it more likely or possible for that to happen. But again, something had to trigger it. And then the exciting thing and the empowering thing for me and for us and people who subscribe to this worldview is that the balance of things that we do every day shifts our genome from an inflammatory expression to an anti-inflammatory expression. So you said, what are some of the biggest things? And of course, I think any good practitioner has to start with diet and lifestyle as the core foundational pieces, right? So what you're eating, your stress load, sleep, and exercise are, to me, the four foundational pieces for health or disease. Right. I always tell people, if you want to flare your autoimmunity, the easiest way to do it is don't get much sleep and stress out. And I basically guarantee that you're going to flare. Right. So those four factors, diet, sleep, exercise, and stress, are the places that I like to start. And diet is, I don't know, I was going to say the easiest place. I mean, maybe not the easiest place for people, but it's something that we all have control over, is what we put in our mouths.
Absolutely.
Unless you're in prison.
Let's pause. I want to create a realistic situation so people, that was beautifully said, by the way, about the epigenetics and the gene environment interaction. And so from some of the studies that I've read, this is occurring very quickly. For example, if you go to McDonald's and have a Big Mac and French fries and a Coke, we're going to see real time changes in, for example, nuclear factor kappa beta, right? And so what are you seeing, like, in your clients and so forth? How do you explain this to them? Like, how real this is, this environment gene connection? I mean, is this occurring? How quickly can we modify this, I guess?
Right. Well, it's a good question. I mean, so certainly, and this is going to vary for people. I mean, some people I've seen as much as, diet changes within one day. People are seeing noticeable changes like in aches and pains and various, if you have digestive autoimmunity like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, certainly one day, even one meal can have noticeable effects for people. So rheumatoid arthritis pain reducing and going away. Obviously, digestive, diarrhea and blood in the stool and cramping and pain from inflammatory bowel disease, changing within the course of one meal. So it can happen within hours. Now, it doesn't always. So some people, it's days or weeks to see, significant changes. So I would prefer if everybody noticed within hours, big changes, but certainly studies suggest we do, either certain compounds that trigger all those anti-inflammatory actions. So again, for the nerds out there, like me and like you, things that trigger NRF2 and things that trigger the antioxidant response elements certainly are going to move things. We'll see those changes happening quickly, or things that activate NF-kappa beta are going to kick the inflammatory side of things into gear. And sometimes people notice that quickly, but the reality is sometimes, it's days or weeks. And I think it depends on how severe the symptoms are for people, in part, how long things have been going on, and just sort of how complex things are. And sometimes that's pretty easy to know, and sometimes it's much less so. So.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because it kind of puts the onus on the person. Once we realize that, we're just a sum of our environment, our thoughts, our emotions, our toxins, our nutrients, and so forth, we can no longer just kind of take inaction and blame our genetics. And so this is kind of one of these things where, when you meet with extended family, or if you're at a corporate party or something like that, where you meet people that aren't in our space, and they say, oh, well, everyone in my family has diabetes, so I'm going to have diabetes. Or everyone in my family has heart disease. And it's like, you want to tell them, no, that's actually not true. Your people in your family probably had heart disease because they were feeding their genes or their immune system bad messages. And so you can prevent that by feeding your genes and your immune system good messages.
Well, yeah, right. What I always tell people is everyone on earth, first of all, there is no Superman or Superwoman, someone who has, zero disease burden and they just cruise through life without ever having any troubles or concerns. That's wishful thinking, and that doesn't exist. All of us have predispositions and weaknesses towards certain things. For example, like my grandmother, she has smoked over a pack of cigarettes a day for 70 years of her life, 70. So a long, 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 long time. She has, I won't say perfectly good, but she's never had any cancer concerns, ever had any lung problems. She is the superstar in terms of genetically very strong lungs and detox pathways through her lungs, so that, that hasn't caused problems for her. On the flip side, we can also, we're all gifted with strengths, and then we're all, I don't know, cursed, but we all have weaknesses as well, certain things. So, for another person, they may never even smoke a single cigarette, and yet, they get lung cancer. Right. They have weaknesses there in the lung tissues and the capacity and various things that have just made them more vulnerable. So all of us have strengths and weaknesses, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, whether it's the different types of autoimmunity, whether it's cancer, whether it's, whatever it is, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And if you have a strong family history of a certain type of disease, to me, the more empowering way to take that, rather than I'm screwed, is simply, this is a warning sign, right? If your dad and your mom and your grandmother and everybody all got diabetes, rather than just throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, forget it, I'm just going to get diabetes, right? We want to say, well, obviously there's a predisposition there towards diabetes. And if I take, my life by the reins, then I have to do more work in that particular area to try and avoid getting diabetes, or at least delay getting diabetes, or make it less severe if it happens, So I think this can be a very empowering thing. Now, let me mention 1 second, because the dark side to me of this whole worldview is that it can put a lot of shame and blame on an individual, right? So if they say, well, if I have tremendous control over my own health, and something bad happens to me, then it's my fault. It's because, you see this in cancer a lot. I got cancer because because of my job, because of that I ate McDonald's, because something or other. It's my fault. And if I'd only done something better, this never would have happened to me. And I think we have to be careful with that, because shame and blame not only don't help people get better, but in fact, just make them worse. Right? Because like you mentioned, our mental state feeds into our epigenome as well and can modify our genetics. So, some fascinating stuff, how laughter and joy change the epigenetics as opposed to, depression and anger, right? So while we want to take this view and empower people and say, listen, your health is not 100% under your control. There's genes, there's bad luck, there's good luck, there's, environmental factors that you can't control, like whether you were breastfed, whether you were delivered by C-section, your childhood upbringing, where your house was located and what you were exposed to as a kid, all of those things you didn't necessarily have any control over, and yet they impact your life. So we don't have 100% control over our lives, and that should be both, a little sad in a way, but also give us a little bit of a break, right? You can't wholly control your health. But at the same time, we don't want to flip to the other side that conventional medicine has said, where basically you have zero or near zero control over your health. And it's a good thing you have an MD around and all of the wonders of modern medicine, because otherwise you're completely screwed. Right.
Right. Gosh. Yeah. Beautifully said there.
Yeah. Just a balance between the two. I mean, what we want to tell people is you can control your health. There's a lot that you can do. And, so with autoimmunity, to bring it back, the place I encourage people to start, whether they work with me, someone else, or they're trying it on their own, which, not recommended, but I understand that that's where some people are at, is make some changes to your diet. Do an elimination, even for 30 days, whether you want to do a paleo style diet, whether you want to try a vegetarian style diet, whether you want to try something else. As long as the focus is on whole, real foods, and you're cutting out some of the most problematic foods out there, which just generally are, wheat and gluten, soy and eggs, dairy, citrus foods, peanuts. I'm missing one, Mike.
Legumes, nightshades.
Legumes can be a problem for people. I'm missing one or two others that just flew off the top of my head. But, if you Google it or you look around for most common problem foods, everybody's pretty much in consensus for the most problematic foods. And if you take those out, 30 days, within days, you may notice significant effects. I mean, I just saw a patient the other day. She was more fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, lots of aches and pains going on for her. And, for her, it was about 10 days on an elimination diet. She saw substantial reductions in her aches and pains, and her mobility improved and everything. And, no other drugs, no other supplements. It was simply taking some of these problem foods out of her diet. So that's the place that I encourage people to start, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're just generally better for taking crap out of your diet. And the best thing that happens is truly your autoimmunity, even serious autoimmunity, might go completely into remission simply with diet changes.
I love that.
And that's, doesn't always happen, but what's the worst you've got to, the worst you've got to lose? Food doesn't cost an arm and a leg generally. And you're not going to run into any serious side effects like, liver failure or other serious problems from it. So, that's where I'd say for people, give it a shot and see what happens. Then, of course, the whole point of the e-booklet that I put out is to say, unfortunately, food alone, doesn't take care of everybody. Right. And so there are a lot of other factors that need to come into play. And if you start with the food piece and it doesn't get you where you need to go, don't give up. There's more that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing information. I think our listeners are going to hit the rewind button on that one, Dr. Tim. But I want to save the mindset information, although I'm compelled to just break it down right now. Let's save that for last. And you hit on a lot of the different foods. And then I want to kind of make that connection between foods and then kind of a controversial topic right now, and SIBO and FODMAPs and simple carbohydrates and resistant starches. Right. So I think that's there's a lot of ambiguity for a lot of individuals right now that have autoimmune disease. A lot of people, at least in research, when it comes to the gut microbiome, are in favor of increasing fermentable carbohydrates because they fuel the growth of bacteria, increase diversity. And then on the autoimmune side, we know that can kind of add fuel to the fire. So break it down for us.
Well, the reality is here, right? We are the microbiome. I mean, anybody who unless you've been hiding under a rock for a while, in the past, I've been interested in the gut for a long time, and the explosion of information on the microbiome over the past 4 or 5 years has been utterly incredible to watch. And I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more information that we're going to learn. So the reality is there's a lot of confusing pieces right now. And hopefully over the next few years, research will help us sort out some of these issues. Now, you can either sort of take what most conventional people are saying, well, it's complicated, we don't really understand, so best not to do anything till we learn more. But as a clinician, someone who's trying to help people in the trenches, we take what we know, we try and keep the risks low, and we move forward, right? So in general, I agree with you. We're getting a better understanding that a healthy gut microbiome, so that is the bacteria that live in our intestines, their primary food for many of them are sugars, starches, and fibers, right? All the so-called FODMAP stuff. If someone hasn't heard that term, FODMAP is this acronym for this really long thing: fermentable oligo, mono, and disaccharides and polyols, which are just different components of food that bacteria tend to like a whole lot. So when you eat the foods that contain those FODMAPs, you're eating foods that bacteria really like. So, for example, you brought up legumes and beans, right, which tend to be really high in these fibers, and that's why beans are called the magical fruit, right? Or Beano, the product, was invented, right? The beans have a lot of fibers that we, as the human being, our digestive machinery can't digest. And so, if that were all of it, if that were all that were involved, you'd eat the beans, you'd digest and absorb some of it, and the rest would just come out the other end. But the bacteria that live inside of us, many of them do have the machinery to break down and digest that food, and when they do, they produce gas as a byproduct. And so the magical side of beans there, in the joke, comes from the fact that our bacteria get hard to work and digest and break down those beans, and then they produce a lot of gas as a byproduct. Beano, of course, is a digestive enzyme that breaks down a lot of those compounds for us so that we can digest and absorb it. And then you don't get the gas, but then the bacteria don't get the fiber either, right? So, evidence is out there suggesting that for a healthy gut microbiome, we need especially those fibers in the diet. And so lots of, vegetables, fruits as well, whole grains, legumes, that kind of thing can all contribute to having a higher fiber diet. Now, depending on, who you want to believe, if memory's serving me right here, the average American's getting about 15 grams of fiber a day. The recommendations are for, I think, 35 to 50 grams of fiber, somewhere in that range. And some of the ancestral estimates for our ancestors were saying, they were getting more than 100 grams of fiber a day. So one theory about, one factor of what we've done to mess up our gut bacteria is just that we don't eat enough fiber, right? And generally, as general advice, hey, eat more vegetables, eat more fruits. If you tolerate beans, eat them. If you tolerate grains, shift to, real whole grains. Like I always tell people, whole grain bread is not really a whole grain, right? If eating a bowl of wheat berries, now that is whole grain, right?
Right.
So again, if you tolerate them, that kind of thing. But then we run into the prop. So in general, if you have pretty good digestion, the emphasis on more whole, real foods, absolutely behind it. You boost your fiber intake. Evidence is saying that you're going to improve the quantity and diversity of your gut bacteria. But then things get a little ugly when we're dealing with, lots of digestive disturbance, and especially SIBO. So anybody who, I'm sure everyone listening to your show, Mike, knows this, but SIBO, a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So what I always tell patients is, we have stem to stern from our mouth all the way to the other end. We have bacteria colonizing the entirety of our digestive tract. But the amount in various areas really changes. So the mouth has quite a lot of bacteria. The stomach has very few bacteria. The small intestine, so small intestine, small amount of bacteria. Large intestine, large amount of bacteria. But SIBO is when there's a large amount of bacteria in the small intestine, right? And that's not supposed to happen. And then the place where we digest and break down our food as human beings, suddenly the bacteria get in there and they're snatching food away from us and stealing it for their own purposes. They make a lot of ends up creating a lot of inflammation that's going on for people. That inflammation damages the small intestine. Then we get a lot of malabsorption going on for people. We get a leaky gut situation going on for people, and then that can lead into a lot of health problems, and autoimmunity is one of them. Mm-hmm. Right. And then the problem is that those healthy fibers and FODMAPs that feed, quote unquote, the good bacteria in the place where they're supposed to be and help make us healthier, they also feed that overgrowth in the small intestine, and then they can make the situation even worse. So SIBO to me is an interesting problem that I don't have a complete answer here, but we end up in a situation where, especially if someone has autoimmunity and SIBO, we really want to encourage the growth of a beneficial gut flora. And we're coming to know that, certain species of bacteria that live inside of us, like there's one of my favorites with the name Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, seems to be, especially in IBD, right, Crohn's and UC, seems to be very anti-inflammatory. It seems to signal the immune system in a really positive way to reduce inflammation. And Faecalibacterium is a eats these FODMAPs to help grow and stay healthy, and yet so we want to give it those fibers, and yet if someone has SIBO, giving those fibers can worsen the SIBO and make the person worse. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I've answered your question, Mike, but it ends up being a little bit of a double bind where, so for priority wise, we have to try and get the SIBO under control and resolve it if possible. And then, as much as possible, we want to reintroduce some of those fibers back into the diet to try and stimulate the diversity of bacteria and get the positive action that's going on there.
Mm-hmm. So to kind of summarize, in an ideal world, we could tolerate a lot of these. No, that was beautifully said there. I love the small intestine, small bacteria, large intestine, large bacteria. I think people can really visualize that. That's fantastic. So in an ideal world, and I think this changes. This has been my personal experience. I haven't done a lot of stool testing on myself. I think the last time I did that was in 2008. But oftentimes we eat a lot of onions with meat, with everything. It's like onions and turmeric and garlic and, FODMAP central. It's interesting, Dr. Gerstmar. Sometimes I get gas and bloating. Other times I tolerate. So I think there's some seasonality or just short-term changes in maybe, okay, what was my alcohol consumption the night before, or how stressed was I, what have you. So I think this changes, and I think it's a moving target. But what I find, at least, in the online space, is people are just so polarized. It's no FODMAPs, or they have a lot of FODMAPs. And I think, that may or may not be true for every single person, and it may change over time with people. Has that been your experience?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I can tell you I agree with you, my own personal experience of trying to really, get as much kind of whole food based, food and fiber into my diet as possible. And I'll agree with you. Sometimes I can down huge amounts of fibrous foods. My digestion's humming along, and there's no problems. And then other times, you want to pull the air raid siren and get people out of the house. And the question is, what changed there? And just like epigenetics, what we found is that the microbiome can change very, very rapidly. Right. Most bacteria measure their lifespan in hours. Right. Some even shorter than that. Some a little longer. And their generations happen very, very quickly. And we know that, there was a study where they pulled people off of fiber. And I can't remember exactly, but I think it was within a day or two, they saw really profound changes in the microbiome of what was going on for those people. So I agree with you in the sense that, if sleep has changed, or like you said, maybe alcohol consumption, or maybe you ran into just in water residue or food residue, you ran into a little bit of antibiotics, or you ran into something, I think the composition of the gut is a constantly changing environment. Mm-hmm. Right. And I do think things can change. And, I hear you. If you have SIBO and fiber respond, you respond really bad to fiber and FODMAPs and stuff, then you know what? You should be on a low FODMAP diet. But just like many other situations, I think the goal should be to try to move to a higher fiber, higher FODMAP diet as tolerated by that person, because fundamentally those are the foods that feed our microbiome, or at least feed a healthy, diverse microbiome that gives us, the benefits that we're looking for. And just like with autoimmunity and any disease, some people are going to be able to get there and some people aren't. And some people, we just do our best, right? The craziest case I've heard of, this is just for fun, I know most people won't do it, but one individual, they had pretty bad SIBO, and they really couldn't tolerate FODMAPs, but they got really geeked out on the microbiome, and their stool test was, the diversity was pretty poor. So what they actually did to bypass the small intestine was they were doing rectal infusions of fibers.
Wow!
Right?
Oh my goodness!
So they would, again, like most people aren't going to do this, but they basically occasionally give themselves an enema of a mix of some of these resistant starches and fibers as a retention enema. So before they went to bed, they would put in a small amount, and then make sure they held it overnight, and they were finding some benefit from doing that. Now that's darn extreme, but certainly just interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've not heard of that, but that makes a lot of sense. I've heard of like rectally inducing probiotics, but why not do the prebiotics too if you can?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of like we know now all the data that we're gathering that's saying just putting in probiotics alone, whether it's in the form of probiotic supplements or what we're hearing trickling down from FMT or fecal transplants, right? Just putting in the probiotics without any prebiotics, again, the fibers and various things that feed the gut bacteria, seem to really only have marginal or temporary effectiveness, right? And the way I think of it personally is, if you're trying to plant your plants, but you don't water them, how lush of a garden are you going to have if you put down, your plants in the middle of a desert and then you don't water them at all? Like, maybe a few will survive, but kind of the lush garden that you're hoping to create just doesn't happen. And that seems to be true. These bacteria feed on a lot on the prebiotics, the various fibers and things from our diet. Now, the other cool thing, Mike, again, just to geek out, is that our guts themselves make fibers or make sugars for use by our bacteria. Right, the bacteria are so important that there's one particular sugar I'm aware of called fucose, not fructose, but fucose, that the cells that line the intestines actually make themselves. It's sort of like where we want to feed the bacteria that we want around, and also we know that women, and we knew this one a while ago. Women vaginally, the vagina makes a lot of sugars that feed lactobacillus preferentially, which then acidify the vagina, which then keep down the risk of getting yeast infections and other infections. So our bodies themselves want to feed these bacteria and help keep them around. And some data is suggesting that what's called FUT or FUT mutations, those are some of the ones that make those fucose sugars, make people more vulnerable to different dysbiosis in the gut, and probably are one factor that's responsible for some issues for people. So
wow. That's fascinating stuff. I haven't dove into that research. I know that there's different like mucin proteins and mucus-based proteins, and certain bad bacteria can degrade the mucus more readily. But that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like too, we know that some of the bacteria, the good, quote unquote, good bacteria stimulate mucus production in the gut. And so one theory is that without them, the mucus layer in the gut is really thin, and then that leads to, then if you get more mucin degraders or bacteria that can chew up and get rid of that mucus, then that leaves the gut wall very vulnerable, and then leaky gut, and all sorts of bad stuff happen for people. So you can really go down the rabbit hole. The data, it just keeps rolling in. Utterly, for those of us so inclined like myself, it's so fascinating to see both the awesome, the way everything works together, and then unfortunately, how it breaks down too. And the goal here is, we know how it breaks down. How can we devise things to help build it back up again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. There was a study about a year ago with rugby players, and they had a really high calorie diet. I think you probably remember this. I think it was British Journal of Nutrition. And what they found that independently correlated with higher levels of, I think it was Akkermansia, which is one of these mucin producing bacteria, was whey protein. Yep. So we've talked a lot about fiber, and I thought that was really interesting that the whey protein may, through some mechanism, grow this bacteria, which improves the mucus layer in the gut.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is one of the other things I've been experimenting with a little, and I don't have enough data to say either way, but we know that a lot of the polyphenolics as well, and that's just a really fancy way of saying like the spices and things that are in a lot of the different vegetables, seem to independently of the fiber intake be beneficial for a bacteria. For example, like chocolate, everyone's favorite, or at least cocoa powder, have shown to be beneficial in boosting the levels of bifidobacterium. And certainly there's a little bit of fiber in cocoa, but it seems to be more about the other phytochemicals that are there. And so one of the questions is, okay, if someone can't tolerate FODMAPs, and this is open, I don't know the answer to this, I've been experimenting with having people use like, berry powders. So whether it's like hawthorn berry powder, or just experimenting with some of the different berry powders, blueberries, these kind of some of these different powders from fruits and spices, can they tolerate those better? And just a little bit, some people do seem to be able to tolerate those better. And is that kind of a little bit of a hack that we can use to try and get around FODMAP intolerances and encourage some of the beneficial bacteria? Maybe.
I love it.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's a great. To follow up on that, there are some studies on just balsamic vinegar, and vinegar has these polyphenolic compounds that grow these, I think it's the Bacteroidetes, and then they create this secondary byproduct that actually suppresses the growth of the firmicutes. I don't know if you're probably pulling the same research, so you might probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I like that, a hack around the fiber, because I think, fiber can have this immediate response to people and it can be negative, but why not try some low dose berry powder or some pure, like that Dagoba dark chocolate, something along those lines.
I didn't actually know balsamic vinegar, so that's a great one. So yeah, balsamic vinegar, and hey, turmeric can do double duty, and a lot of these other, spices. And so, for people out there, if you can't tolerate FODMAPs, don't give up. We know we need to nourish and feed the bacteria, and give it a shot. If it flares your symptoms, then maybe it's not right for you. But at least some people, my personal experience seemed to suggest that at least some people seem to be able to tolerate some of these therapies instead. So
I love it. Great information. We could probably talk on this stuff for like 3 hours, but
look, I talk to a wall about this stuff. I find it so interesting. So I really appreciate you having me on to discuss, Mike, and I hope people are finding this helpful and interesting. The gut microbiome is huge, and it is definitely a big piece in dealing with autoimmunity, right? And so. And food, of course, food plays into that as one way to affect it. Both, we have sort of these two systems now, independently of our genetics, that we can influence. And one is the epigenetics, and the second is the microbiome. And to me, that's tremendously exciting. And we know, I always tell people you can't make any promises here, but if you undertake this work, the worst thing that's going to happen is that you're generally a healthier person that still has autoimmunity and has to take, the drugs or whatever to deal with it. But you will be a healthier person. You will very likely need less of that drug than somebody else who wasn't doing these other things. You won't have the same side effect profile that someone who's not doing these general health boosting measures, and you will overall be healthier. And the best thing that happens is, your autoimmunity is in complete remission, and what I sort of deem as relative cure, meaning you're really aware of what you need to do. You're doing these things on a daily basis, and your autoimmunity sort of never rears its head and isn't a big either psychological or physical factor in your life anymore. And like I said, if people take a look at the book, the negatives here are that it takes effort to do. It's not as easy as just getting an infusion or popping a pill. It really, this is about getting to know yourself, both mentally, emotionally, spiritually for people, and physically, and know your body, know its limits, know how things in your environment affect you, and the things that you need to do to stay healthy. And it unfortunately also, so it takes time and effort. The other thing is time, right? The good news is the drug, if someone's in pain and hurting or suffering severe symptoms, I will often say, look, for example, a gentleman with Crohn's disease came in and he was, right on the edge of a flare. And I did recommend some prednisone to get things under control for him. And I know, there are NDs out there who gasp in horror at prednisone or whatever. And my 2 cents is, drugs aren't bad. So that's another piece I really dive into. If people are interested, I really would like them to read the booklet and try and take home that piece that, a lot of people who come to see me are their first priority is get off drugs. And I think that there's nothing wrong with the wanting to get off drugs. They're expensive. They're forever in the case of autoimmunity. And, the side effect profile can be nasty for some of these drugs. But my first priority is your quality of life, not whether you're on drugs or off drugs, right? A lot of people with Hashimoto's, the autoimmunity of the thyroid gland, they'll come in and their first priority is, I want off thyroid hormone right now. And it's like, well, you know what? I mean, that's fine. Just go off your thyroid hormone. What's going to happen? You're going to feel like crap, right? Because you're going to go back into being hypothyroid in that case. And my goal is not necessarily to get you off thyroid hormone. It's to get your quality of life really good. And then hopefully as a secondary product to get you off that drug because your body is doing so well, your autoimmunity is controlled, you feel so good, you no longer need that hormone. But when we set ourselves up as the primary thing is to get off the drug at all cost, then when you do all this work, if you don't get off the drug, you're a failure. You failed because you still have to be on that drug, whether it's prednisone or methotrexate, Remicade, or thyroid hormone or whatever it is. If you don't get off that drug, you're a failure. And I think that's the wrong approach to take. My goal is to get you so healthy and feeling good so that you can say, if you do this treatment and you feel healthy and you feel good and your symptoms are under control and you're back to your life, then it's a success. If you can then go off your drugs, then you've got another success to go on top of that first success. But if you can't get off your drugs, because that's the situation that we're in right now, you're still a success because your quality of life is good and you can get back to your life as a whole. So yeah, I put this guy on some prednisone to get things under control. Now, if that had been the entirety of my treatment, then in my opinion, that's horrible naturopathic or comprehensive care for someone. But to get someone back under control, prevent them from having to be hospitalized and all of that, I'm perfectly happy to put someone on prednisone or on any of these other drugs. But you got to do, in my opinion, you got to do more, right?
Yeah.
So sorry about that rant there, Mike, but
no,
that's just a big one for me is the drug issue.
Mhm. Yeah. And what's coming through when you speak is you don't have any biases. You just want people to be healthier, and you're shooting for optimal. And if you need to take a medication to get there, fine, so be it. Better life through chemistry. And I think a lot of people are so, like we talked about, polarized with FODMAPs or low FODMAPs or no drugs, or they love drugs. It's like just as Jay Cheetah has recently come on the show and taught me, you got to get rid of your biases. If you think you're paleo, but paleo is making you fat, then start eating more vegetables and cut down on your protein, something like that. So just listen to your body and so forth. And you hit on the mindset aspect of healing and autoimmunity many times now. You have some great resources and books. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. It's my belief, and so depending on where you come from in your, I guess, biases, right? I mean, one, I would say, just for 1 second to detour, Mike, I think that's a really fruitful place for everyone. The human condition, all of us are biased, right? It's the way our brains are hardwired. But I think all of us, every single one of us, could benefit by exploring and learning a little bit more about our own biases and the way that our brain works. There's a great quote that I'm going to just totally mangle right here from Richard Feynman, the famous physicist. But he basically said, oh, crud, I'm going to totally mess with it. But, it just something along the lines of everyone is fooled by their biases, and you are the biggest fool of all. Just basically saying, every single one of us, no matter how sort of scientific or rational or objective we think we are, every single one of us is biased. And again, that's okay. That's just what we are, and it's sort of the evolutionary programming that our brain and our mental piece comes equipped with. But trying to understand that bias a little bit better, and to see where it leads us astray and how it affects our thinking, I think is really, really fruitful. And there are a whole bunch of different books that sort of explore the biases. And I'm trying to think. I know there's one called, it's something along the lines of like, You're Not So Smart. And then there was a follow-up book, something like You're Less Dumb Now, or You're Less Stupid Now. I forget. It's a pretty humorous title. He explores a lot of those cognitive biases. I know Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational, that was a bestseller a little ways ago, talks about our biases. And I think everyone, but especially any doctors out there, any healthcare practitioners, people who are trying, or fitness people, nutrition people who are listening, it's not about dogma. It's right. We are in this to get people better, to improve their quality of life. And if our approach works for them, then they absolutely should do that. But if our approach doesn't work for them, either we need to send them on to someone with a different approach, or we need to change our approach. Mm-hmm. I'll give you one quick example. Like, again, I generally tend to follow a paleo style approach. And I had one patient, she was doing the GAPS diet, GAPS diet, a low carb, high fat diet. And she did really poorly on it. She stuck with it for a while. She eventually found that going basically vegan was made her feel tremendously better. So sort of flipping the GAPS approach 180 and doing the exact opposite was really helpful for her. And, you can make up excuses about why, maybe she just wasn't doing GAPS good enough or hard enough, or there were some other factors that were preventing it from working. But at the end, and why vegan diets are so bad or whatever. I mean, you can engage in all that the cognitive bias and everything, or you can just simply say, you know what? It didn't work for her. She found an approach that did work for her. As a practitioner, can I continue to guide her, or is she better off finding a different, provider with more experience, with like vegan diets, for example, that's going to work better for her? So, a little hijack from what I think you wanted, but mindset wise, I really, anyone who's working with people, and then hopefully anyone just in general, we got to ditch our biases as much as we can and be on guard against them, and stay open-minded, because if we're here to help people, dogma doesn't help,
mm-hmm.
right?
And it doesn't help yourself either. Like that woman that you mentioned, or the patient of yours.
Right.
Awesome.
Right.
Beautifully said there. So we'll have to look at some of those books and post them at the show notes at highintensityhealth.com/drgerstmar. I have that Predictably Irrational. I don't know if you can see it behind me. It's kind of in the blue back there somewhere. And then the other one that I've read recently is Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, and talks about
Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, good one. The more we can know about our brains and our minds, and not necessarily you have to memorize all the bits and pieces in there, but just the way that they work. I think, in the same way that we're saying, look, all of this medicine is about getting to know yourself better. And we can talk physically about how foods impact you and the gut and various things, but also about how your brain works. And I'll say this too. My experience has been that basically everyone I've seen with autoimmunity, this sounds a little woo-woo, but here we go. From a emotional perspective, there's been either a modest amount or a good deal of self-hatred going on in those people, right? If we think about things, if we step back from the molecular mechanisms for a second and just think about things and say that autoimmunity is your own body fighting itself, right? Sort of like punching yourself in the stomach and head and everything over and over. That's what your immune system is kind of doing, right? And so it's a profoundly self-destructive act. And so on an emotional plane, I found, when we get in and we talk to people, there's definitely, at least some degree of self-hatred going on there for people. And I've definitely seen it be really helpful when people have sort of undertaken work on that, and whether that's going to counseling, whether that's just being introspective and doing journaling, or some people find the different tapping therapies, as kind of weird as those seem, they found them very helpful, or doing things like there's a spiritual teacher out there, Byron Katie, who has quote unquote the work on sort of negative emotions and things, and whatever resonates for people, but finding a way to kind of work through that negative self-hatred and those negative emotions, and come to a place where they can love and accept themselves. I've seen it make a big difference for people, whether it's just quality of life, but I've also seen it seems to help on that physical plane, and those the biochemical markers and various things for people. So I don't think it is the only issue going on for people, but since mind and body really are not separate from one another, and what we experience in our emotions is a physical thing, I think people are better served by doing that emotional work again, and that's not easy, but definitely profound improvements in quality of life with that kind of stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. And for people that are kind of listening and going, this is a bunch of hogwash, what is he talking about? All you have to do is type in Google PNI, psychoneuroimmunology. So your thoughts influence your neurology and your immune system. So I love this conversation.
The Descartes, the mind and body are separate from one another. It's just wrong. Right. Mm-hmm. People, there's Candace Pert's work and her book, Molecules of Emotion. It's a little old now, but, she found that all the brain chemicals, serotonin and dopamine and everything else that are supposedly just in the brain, basically most of the cells of the rest of our body have receptors for those chemicals. And so what you feel impacts your immune system, pretty profoundly. And, if we take it from another realm, some data on, cancer again, and immune dysfunction going on for people. And there was one, pretty famous study now that said that women with severe breast cancer, those who attended support groups and got, emotional support, lived longer than the women who didn't, and from a purely physical biochemical perspective, if you ignore the PNI stuff, that shouldn't happen, but it does. Right. So, so a little far out there for some, but definitely I encourage anybody with autoimmunity to just think about it and see if there's a lot of self-hatred or, some really ugly feelings brewing in there. At the least, it's not helping your quality of life.
Right. Absolutely.
And at best, it is playing a part in the immune dysfunction that's central to your autoimmunity.
Mm-hmm. Great. Awesome information there. So as we finish up, we have 3 last questions here, Dr. Gerstmar. The first one would be,
Yes, sir.
What's your favorite food substance, nutrient, herb, or botanical, and why?
Oh man, this is killer, right? Like everybody, it's 50 things spring to mind, and I'm going to go with just the tried and true one that many people have talked about before, but I just can't get enough of turmeric and curcumin. I mean, the more data that we look at, the more that stuff seems truly magical. And they talked about. I mean, MDs sometimes in their crazy fantasies talk about putting statins in the water. I'd almost like to see us just go ahead and put curcumin in the water, because not only is it profoundly anti-inflammatory and affects that, the NRF2 pathways that we talked about before, but it's generally liver protective and liver, restorative. It helps with detox pathways and glutathione. I mean, there just doesn't seem to be anything negative that turmeric or curcumin does for people. And with autoimmunity, in my treatments, it's just been an old standby. I have yet to see, I'm just thinking in, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases, I've yet to see curcumin, do something bad to somebody. I've seen cases where it just hasn't seemed to have been tremendously effective for them. And I've seen cases where it's been hugely effective for people, but I've never seen it, unlike, some of the hardcore prescriptions, I've never seen it cause a problem for someone. I'm sure on the internet, you can find someone who's had a bad experience with it, right? But I've yet to see it be a problem for people. And the more we learn about it, just the more awesome that stuff seems. So
I love that. We cook a lot with curcumin. I would say the only kind of negative would be when you cook with it, your hands turn orange, which you can deal with that. But that's like the worst thing that could possibly happen. I take a supplement from Zymogen that I really like, but we also cook a lot with it. And we do our shopping on Sundays at a local co-op here, PCC. I'm sure you go there too. And I bought a bag of it. It's in season right now. It's not always available, the organic stuff. And it was, I think like 20 little roots. And it was $3.75. I'm thinking, gosh, that is so much curcumin. So we put it in our smoothies, and I know there's some absorption issues, but I'm just going after the polyphenols in a smoothie. We put it, whenever we do meat or, like ground beef or ground lamb, cook it in there to get the polyphenols to neutralize endotoxins. There's so many different ways to do it, and it's inexpensive. So find your local co-op or your local store and buy some.
Absolutely. I mean, just out there, you don't necessarily have to use the expensive supplemental form of a lot of these things. We were just mentioning, turmeric there. Absolutely. Cook with it. Again, the Indian tradition has, turmeric as a big, as one of the central spices used a lot in Indian cooking. And, the epidemiologic data shows lower incidence of a lot of stuff. And part of that is obviously related to it. The cool thing, Mike, with absorption is if we were just talking about how these things affect the microbiome, you may not be absorbing it very well, but it's certainly going to be affecting your microbiome. And then the positive changes, hopefully there that are in the microbiome, then trickle down and affect you anyway. So absorb it, don't absorb it. It seems good either way, basically, right?
Yeah. I love that approach. Awesome. So the final question here, Dr. G, is if you were in an elevator with the current president or a future president and just had 30 or 60 seconds to share with them a lifestyle or health tip that you would like them to really emphasize in policy and to the American public, what would that lifestyle or health tip be and why?
Yeah, this is, again, like such a hard question because I think like most of us, there's just a million, there's a lot of changes that we would like to see. I think, we can boil it down to, for me, I'd like to see that they're emphasizing this change in mindset for people. So we have a society in general, I feel, that is very around health, that is very disempowering for people. Diets fail and aren't successful. So now we're hearing, some of the advice is, well, just don't ever bother going on a diet because it just makes the situation worse in the long run. It'd be great if people would exercise, but, no one will ever really do it anyway. So, sort of why bother? And so I think if we could get, and then this quickly cascades into a million different things that I'd like people to do. But if anything, I think I'd really like the medical community and the politicians and everyone, the people who are sort of, if you will, at the top, to emphasize that there's a lot that people can do for themselves. And then I think the second piece would be that it doesn't necessarily have to be really super hard stuff that people have to do. If we just got people, for example, to eat more vegetables, right? That would be just a single diet and they change nothing else. Okay, fine, eat your Twinkies and your donuts and your ding dongs, but you know what? Eat more vegetables with them as well, right? There would still be benefits that people would notice from that. If we just got people to do a little bit of activity, right? It's enough to say, oh, we want weight training and we want high intensity training and we want blah. But look, if we could just get people, I don't know, to walk a little bit more, there would still be health benefits from doing that, right? If we got people to sleep a little bit more, there would be health benefits from doing that. If we got people to manage their stress a little bit better, there would still be health benefits from doing that. So I think if we could get top people to emphasize to people that there are things that we can do that make a big impact, and that we could package them to say, you don't have to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour to see benefits in terms of your health, right? Even small steps still make a change for people, and we could package it and get people moving forward in small ways. Would it solve all of our problems? Of course it wouldn't. There's tons of things that honestly need to be addressed here, but I think if we could get people in the mindset that there are things they can do, and if we can get people making small changes, we'd start to see some changes, and hopefully then that would feed forward. People are feeling better and they're healthier, and then we could start making a lot of the other changes that people need. So I'd like them to emphasize mindset and easy actions for people, and that's where I'd start.
That's fantastic. One thing I use, like in my own internal kind of decision tree, if you will, on, with priorities, with work, with guests on a podcast, whatever it may be, finances, is focus on what's going to make the biggest impact. So for example, if you're a person that struggles with energy, maybe sleep would be the biggest thing that you should focus on. If you have a lot of GI issues, maybe you should really focus on food. If you got a lot of weight related issues, maybe you need to focus your energies on walking more. And you don't need, like you said, you don't need to walk a marathon and start, doing 70 miles a week. You can start out just 10 minutes a day and bump it up to 17 minutes a day, whatever it may be. So I love that. No.
Well, I'll even have people, Mike, I even have people start with 1 minute a day. 1 minute a day, right? Because it's sort of like, look, if you're a couch potato and you haven't done any exercise and the thought of exercise is terrifying to you, and I don't mean to make light, but the thought of exercise sounds horrible and terrible and you have zero interest in doing it, but okay, fine, maybe you should do something, then I'll literally start people out with 1 minute of exercise. And so we say, can you do 1 minute of exercise a day? And everyone goes, yeah, that's fine. I can do 1 minute of exercise. And I say, look, if you're going to bed at night and you realize you haven't done your 1 minute of exercise, you can stop for 1 minute and do something, right? Whether it's walking in place or doing a few, push-ups or sit-ups or jumping jacks or just literally anything, right? And then after 30 days or 60 days, you've begun to build a habit. You've begun to see that that works. And then you can start building off your 1 minute and going there. And we can do the same with, adding such a little thing as adding one side salad a day to your diet. And you can even, buy the pack of prepackaged, lettuce and croutons and dressing. As much as I may have problems with it, you can buy that thing from the store and you can just dump it in your bowl and eat it alongside, your TV dinner or whatever. And it's just getting people started in some way. Many of us are perfectionists at heart, and that is more trouble than it's worth, right?
Yes.
So something is better than nothing for anyone out there. And then, of course, to come back, autoimmunity is often a comprehensive thing. And for my experience, why I wrote this, why I'm trying to get this out there, is that I see a lot of people, whether they're online resources or whether they're practitioners, they're banging the drum really hard about one piece, whether that's, an autoimmune style diet, whether that's, a particular therapy like, curcumin or low dose naltrexone or, whatever it is, they're banging the drum super hard about one thing. And then I see people, they become my patients who jump from thing and that doesn't work. And then they jump and try another thing and then that doesn't work. And then another thing. But nobody is putting things together in a comprehensive fashion, trying to address things in multiple ways for people. because we have this big class of diseases called autoimmunity, and we know what many of them share in common, but how people got there can be different, and different things can be, the big factors that are dysregulating their immune system. And so, you brought it up in the beginning and we haven't mentioned it. I don't think we will get a chance in this call, but, toxicity and heavy metals and various immune compounds like Hashimoto's, BPA and some of the other compounds have been shown. DDT, for example, or its breakdown product DDE has been, implicated a lot in Hashimoto's, and things like mercury have been implicated in multiple sclerosis. And so toxicity can be a big issue for some people. And if we don't address these things as comprehensively, then that leaves a lot of people just hanging out suffering. So that was why I tried to put this thing together for people, and also to crystallize my own thinking around the issues, and help more people. So
love that. Great approach. So let's talk about the website. Where can people learn and download the Autoimmune Answer?
Yeah. So if you, I put together this free little e-booklet for people. It outlines what we've talked about in the show and more. And again, it's free. People can go online and get it. So the easiest place to go to my website, Aspire Natural Health. That's ASPIRE Natural Health, all one word, .com. And then you just click on the Autoimmune Answer tab at the top, put in your email, and we'll send it off to you, and you can take a look at that. If it resonates with you, try it, take it to your other health professionals and use it. Or if you feel so inclined, give us a call, and we'll see about helping you out. But my central message here, Mike, what I'd like to just close on for people: if you have autoimmunity, don't be in despair and don't give up. You certainly can do the drugs and the conventional route if it works well for you and that's what you want to do. I think there's a much better, more comprehensive way of dealing with autoimmunity that at its least, the least thing that it's going to do for you is improve the quality of life and reduce the amount of drugs that you need to take to keep your autoimmune disease managed. And at best, it's not only going to make you a healthier person, but it's going to put your autoimmunity into remission, and let you get on with your life and not worry about having autoimmune disease anymore. We don't have all the answers, but I think we have a lot of them. And I think there's a lot more that people can do. So have hope that there is a lot more that you can do if you have autoimmunity. I encourage you, get help, whether you do it yourself, you find another practitioner who generally kind of broadly agrees with the things that we're talking about. You can go to the website, you can get the PDF, you can take it to your healthcare professional, and you can say, can we do something like this comprehensive approach? Or, you can come and see me as well. But have hope and don't give up.
Perfect. Love it, Dr. G. Keep up the great work. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.